The Airbus A350 is already able to take off without any inputs by the pilots. Most of the airplanes are able to auto-land in zero visibility conditions where pilots struggle to see the runway. We have autonomous drones taking up the skies. Ever more lightweight small business jets are taking off with one pilot only. The flight deck crew has shrunk from 5 crew members to today mostly 2. In 1988, the Energia Buran, a Soviet space shuttle, lifted up without a crew aboard. Buran performed flawlessly, completing 2 orbits before returning to Earth to land under remote control. We have come quite a long way since. With ever-improving technology, there is one component that we are missing out: the human component. This is why there will never be single-pilot airliners. My name is Flo. Welcome to Foredeck. The first jet-like airliners had 4 engines. They've then gone ahead and reduced it down to 3 with the introduction of the Hawker in 1962 and the Boeing 727 in 1963. Why? To reduce fuel costs and maintenance costs. How? Engines were getting ever more reliable, and that's how we have gone from 4 engines jets crossing the pond to today mostly 2 engine jets flying. The probability of one engine failing is almost neglectable, but it's still not nil. One engine outs do happen, and that's why we have a second engine. An airliner has to be able to safely reach an alternate airport at any stage of the flight, even when crossing the pond. If we would go ahead and propose the idea of a one-engine commercial jet aircraft operation, someone would have to explain the concept of engine-out emergencies. While we have seen single-engine pistons landing off-field, it's not so easy with a 100-ton airliner with a 140 knots approach speed. Passengers are paying for tickets and we are providing them with a service. I would suggest it's almost immoral to book hundreds of people on an aircraft that would have to land in a field or ditch in the water if one system fails. When I was studying for ATP theory, there was one question that I particularly remember. Aviation has to be as safe as commercially possible. 4 engines and 3 hours of reserve fuel would in some situations certainly be safer than 2 engines and 30 minutes of reserve fuel, plus the fuel to go to the alternate, which is currently the legal minimum required to carry on board once the mains touch down at your destination. But no one is willing to pay the price of that ticket, and the resulting increase in safety is so little that in almost 100% of the situations 2 engines suffice and 30 minutes plus alternate fuel is enough. With safety, you have to draw the line somewhere, and while commercial aviation is ridiculously safe, it could still be made safer, but it would not be economically feasible. So going from 3, 4 or even 5 pilots to nowadays mostly 2 has caused a lot of people a lot of headaches, as has gone from 4 engines to 2. And the arguments for reducing the redundancy on the propulsion part are pretty convincing. Maintenance, engine testing and development have gone a long way from the early beginnings in the 40s. Nowadays, strict maintenance bulletins are to be complied with by the operator, together with around-the-clock system monitoring and data link, where in modern aircraft, performance data is downlinked in flight to let the engine manufacturers and maintenance facilities know if there is a potential issues with any of the parameters. So a potential engine failure could be prevented before something catastrophic happens. And the public has accepted the modern picture of boarding a twin jet for a long-haul flight, with many people probably not even questioning the technology and development that has gone into the aircraft. So many could suggest that the public would accept one pilot missing from the flight deck, with the commander solely then being responsible for the whole aircraft. For a cheap ticket, the regular passenger would probably hop on anything. But that's not a decision to be made by the flying public. With metal tubes flying across the sky weighing hundreds of tons, it's not only the responsibility to protect the passengers, but also the general public. So every commercial decision made that might mess with flight safety has to be argued and presented. We have removed the flight engineer with the introduction of the full authority digital engine control and the electronic centralized aircraft monitor, which basically is a screen in the middle of the cockpit, typically right in front of the thrust levers. The ECAM displays all the relevant engine and systems data and also produces messages detailing failures and in certain cases lists procedures to undertake to correct the problem. The FADEC is a system consisting of a digital computer called the electronic engine controller and its related accessories that control all aspects of aircraft engine performance. This system analyzes the engine and air data up to 90 times per second to then adjust fuel flow, stator vane position, bleed valve position, and others. We have removed the navigator, who has in the early days navigated with the help of a sextant, but coming up with more convenient ground-based radio beacons and even more important RNAV or GPS navigation, which basically allows the pilot to track to any coordinates or waypoints around the world. So the reasonable argument has always been technology improving dramatically over the years, but now human factor comes into the equation. Pilot error is responsible for up to 53% of today's plane crashes, although exact numbers are hard to define, as in most of the crashes multiple reasons are the problem. Do you think that number would increase or decrease if we remove one pilot from the equation? Fewer pilots equal fewer crashes? The most common human factor for aviation accidents are decision-based errors, mental states of the pilot, communication issues, man-machine interface confusion, false situational awareness, fatigue, and lack of proper training. To go into more detail would call for a completely separate video. With everything in aviation, every system is double, triple, or even quadruple redundant. 2 engines, 3 hydraulic systems, 3 inertial reference units to determine one's position if GPS and/or ground-based radio beacons have failed. So multiple systems are in place to either cross-check each other, as it is the case with the INS, or to take over one's task if a system is impaired, as it is the case with the hydraulics. In the cockpit, pilots are constantly cross-checking each other, with each pilot calculating their takeoff and landing data or making important decisions like taking on extra fuel because of weather or delays. If the ability of one pilot to control the plane is impaired, the other pilot is perfectly capable of safely landing the plane, just like one operating engine is perfectly safe to carry a plane down towards the next adequate airport. In today's cockpits all around the world, one of the pilots is actually flying the plane, which will be the pilot flying, and the other pilot will be monitoring the systems and talking on the radio, which will be the pilot monitoring. A big part of flying and monitoring is already completely automated, with takeoff and landing being usually the only phases of flight where the aircraft is controlled manually. Even the landing can be flown completely by the autopilot. Autoland will guide the aircraft down to the runway, flare the aircraft, brake, and use the rudder to maintain the aircraft on the center line of the runway, if the airport is equipped with the required systems. The main reason why pilots fly manually is to remain proficient. So when everything seems to be automated and pilots sit there to enjoy their ride, why would you have them sit there in the first place? To remove the only component of redundancy in the cockpit that is not backed up by technology, as many of the qualities that make a pilot cannot be simply taken over by machines, is not only unreasonable, but could be fatal as well. We have to keep in mind that even with a fully autonomous aircraft, the plane still has to be programmed. Performance data along with weights, waypoints, and airways and fuel has to be programmed into the flight management computer. Without the data being cross-checked by a second pilot, small discrepancies can make for big deviations in the lateral or vertical flight path. Wrongly calculated performance can lead to unsafe takeoffs or landings. What if a pilot gets incapacitated? This just happened recently on November 19, 2022, when an American Eagle Embraer E-175 departed from Chicago O'Hare. As the aircraft takes off, the captain in training loses consciousness, forcing the check airman in the right seat to assume control and return to O'Hare. In a single pilot airline incapacitation, you would lose one layer of safety and you now would have to completely rely on the plane to land itself. We already have single pilot jets flying passengers today. The Embraer Phenom 300, Pilatus PC-24 and Cessna Citation CG-4 are one of the biggest jets you can operate single-handedly. But there's a catch. Operations have to be conducted under Part 91. And there is still a distinct difference between flying a private jet with a single pilot and 6 passengers, or 6 passengers paying for a flight in a private jet that is commercially operated. An air operator has the responsibility to fly their passengers safely and to even do so during emergencies or pilot incapacitation. Captain Richard, who famously helped save the lives of 469 passengers and crew when an engine exploded on the Airbus A380, said this in a recent interview with the Sydney Morning Herald. Quote, "Adding a second pilot doesn't double your skills, the benefit is exponential. That's why I'm amazed that the safety authorities do not understand the human factors of safety in an aircraft. Why would you knowingly reduce the most critical asset for the passenger's survival to just one pilot in the cockpit? It just makes absolutely no sense at all." Unquote. There are a few problems with single-pilot airliners that I like to address. The idea that is being proposed is that the single pilot who remains to be seated in the flight deck is now the pilot monitoring on every flight. The plane would fly by itself, with the pilot monitoring the autopilot and potentially intervening if something seems not right. If so, the pilot in the flight deck could talk to ground staff about the problem and they could together evaluate their facts, options, risks, benefits and outcomes to then take action. Even if, let's say, a fully autonomous autopilot is able to fly an aircraft, it would rely fully on sensors feeding information to the air data computer and the flight control computer. If sensors fail due to contamination or icing, the aircraft will be unable to continue to fly, let alone land at an airport. So if sensors would fail, which would require the single pilot to possibly hand fly the aircraft, the pilot in command would be the pilot flying and the pilot monitoring at the same time. The pilot would have to read through checklists, manage system malfunctions, talk to ATC, and come up with a plan to save the day, without having someone next to you to discuss options. So no matter how sophisticated an autonomous vehicle would be, in a contingency situation, the pilot would be under an immense workload. And yes, such failures would be a very rare case, but so are engine failures, and still, no one would talk about removing one engine from an airliner. Another reason to have two pilots in the flight deck is that the mental state of the pilot is not as easy to assess as the airworthiness of an aircraft. Germanwings flight 9525 from Barcelona to Düsseldorf was deliberately crashed into the Alps by the co-pilot Andreas Lubitz when the captain left the cockpit to go to the bathroom. It should not come down to a single pilot making one bad decision for a flight to be fatal and 150 souls to lose their lives. Remember the proposed solution to the elimination of former flight crew members. It was always technology being able to perform someone's task better or at least as well as its human opponents. And I completely agree that monitoring hundreds of different engine, hydraulic, pressurization, fuel and air condition parameters, a computer is way better than any human. Even simple things such as holding altitude, heading, a specific power setting or speed, computers are way better than any human. But for decision making and logical and creative thinking, humans are way better than machines. And decisions are being made not only during emergencies. During the whole flight, the pilot makes operational, economical and safety critical decisions. And those decisions are then cross-checked with the other crew member because humans make mistakes. Everything that a machine should be able to do has to be programmed in. And if the aircraft is not programmed to manage a dual engine failure at 3,000 feet for the same reason that pilots are entrained for that scenario, because it statistically never happens, you can only imagine what the Hudson River incident would have looked like. With artificial intelligence technology moving forward, it will be interesting to see the capabilities when it will be first implemented in an aircraft. Even though today's aircraft are highly automated, they still call for a competent crew member to monitor flight trajectory and parameters. The captain who saved the A380 and its crew and passengers on board when one of its engines exploded also added, quote, "The checklist is flashing to say one wing is heavier than the other, and so to transfer fuel to balance the weights. But the problem is that even with 250,000 sensors, there aren't enough to get the whole picture of the fuel system. We had multiple fuel tanks we could see were leaking tons of fuel, and the system was telling us to transfer fuel from the good wing into the leaking wing, which was not just wrong, it would have made our situation worse. By delegating tasks among the 5 pilots and consulting each other, we are creating novel solutions, thinking outside the square, amassing all our knowledge, training and experience, making decisions as a team. We decided to ignore that fuel checklist And even today, I would not change any of the hundreds of decisions we made that day. That is not a reflection on me. It's a reflection on the ability of the team of 5 pilots in the cockpit to come together to pool all of our knowledge, training and experience to become one resilient team. Unquote. I will link the full interview down in the description. I highly recommend reading through the whole conversation. A computer can never be programmed for every single malfunction that could possibly happen. A good assessment of the situation is required to see what is really going on and to take proper action, as the crew did of flight QF32 from Singapore to Sydney. I'm certain that we will see autonomous vehicles capable of transporting passengers and goods someday in the future. Some of the technology needed is implemented in military drones already today. But instead of transporting cameras or even weapons, you have to transport passengers and be able to fly them safely over populated areas, as well as long stretches of ocean. The autonomous vehicle has to adapt to environmentally dynamically changing situations and be able to respond to any system failures. That means an even more redundant flight control system with even more redundant sensors feeding information to the aircraft. For a single pilot operation to become reality, the aircraft must have at least the same capability that represents the human pilot it is replacing. It must be able to make creative decisions, think outside the box, make profound decisions, and challenge the pilot if disagreeing. You'd never go ahead and remove one engine from the aircraft, but you could go ahead and remove both engines if you could come up with a different way of propelling the plane through the air. So once we've reached this still very science fiction level of technology, you might want to get rid of the pilot all along. Stay safe. Until the next one.